Welcome to a conversation with Clear Mountain Monastery. We're very happy to have Kaira Lingo joining us today. So, Kaira, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so a quick bio. Kaira Lingo is a senior Dharma teacher in the Plum Village Zen lineage and a Vipassana teacher and a member of the Plum Village North American Dharma Teachers Council of Elders. Her work continues the engaged Buddhism developed by Thich Nhat Hanh, drawing inspiration from her parents' lives of service and her father's work with Martin Luther King Jr. After living as an ordained nun for 15 years in Thich Nhat Hanh's monastic community, Kaira now teaches internationally in the Zen and Vipassana traditions, as well as in secular mindfulness contexts. Her teaching focuses on the intersection of racial, climate, and social justice, with particular care for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, as well as activists, artists, educators, families, and youth. Based in New York, she offers spiritual mentoring and is faculty in a Buddhist eco-chaplaincy training and one of the guiding teachers of One Earth Sangha. She is the author of We Were Made for These Times, 10 Lessons in Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption, and co-author of Healing Our Way Home, Black Buddhist Teachings on Ancestors, Joy, and Liberation. So thanks for joining us, Kaira.
Thank you for having me.
So when someone recommended that we get to speak with you, we mentioned this before we started recording, but just hearing the way you you teach and speak, just the softness and gentleness, and also that paired with, resonant with the title of that book, We Were Made for These Times, just really, I feel like cutting to the core of people's kind of concern and worry over this moment and being placed in the midst of so much swirling forces. And I've just appreciated this dichotomy in your teaching, both the softness and the directness. And we also discovered, this resonance between both of us setting up communities on either side of the U.S. So we'll get to speak to all those elements, but I really wanted to honor your past first because it's fascinating. You write that you grew up in an old, repurposed insurance building in Chicago with several hundred people, with spiritual practice at the heart of our collective life. And from the age of 8, I spent 4 rich and impactful years living over a bar in an area considered one of Africa's biggest slums on the outskirts of Nairobi, eventually getting a BA and MA in anthropology at Stanford, which is quite a trajectory through the world. And then, of course, ordained as a nun of the Thich Nhat Hanh lineage as well. But through this extraordinary youth, what key moments led you to your Buddhist faith and then to ordination?
Yeah. The community that my parents joined really emphasized simple living, simplicity, and was really kind of modeled on a monastic foundation, but for lay people with families and couples. So, another person who grew up in that community described themselves as a child monk growing up. I think just seeing the people around me make these radically different choices to what was happening in the world, sort of mainstream culture, where, we woke up at 5 a.m. with a bell, and we went to a daily office, the morning service. So it was dark. There was incense, there was chanting, there was something that was very compelling to me, even as a small child. Like there was something very reassuring about that early morning practice, and just the regularity of it, and the sense of people joining together in prayer and meditation. And then just being in such an international community where people from really all over the world were part of our community, and art on the walls was from all over the community. And, we were singing songs in different languages, in Swahili and Hindi and Bengali and Spanish, and just that was what we sang all the time, all throughout the day, and so wherever our community did a village or human development project, we would incorporate their songs into our songbook, and so people in Brazil would be singing a song, in Malayalam from Kerala in India, or people in Indonesia might be singing a song in Portuguese because of the development project in Brazil. And so my friends were from all over the world. And so this sense early on of belonging to the whole world, which for me is very much something that I associate with monastic life, this right way we leave our home and we belong to the world, we belong to everyone. And so this seeing myself as a global citizen early on, and not having the expectation, not seeing that in the adults around me, and not having the expectation for my own life that I would find happiness in material security. I think that was something that really got deeply embedded in me. And so I remember when we left the community kind of disbanded in the 80s with, Reagan era and not so much funding, and it was sort of for financial reasons. And so we lived, for the first time when I was 14, we had a sort of normal nuclear family life. And I remember feeling so like it was so empty. And I was coming home from school one day and just looking around me and thinking, is this it? Like, this is all? Like, the richness of the spirituality was so ever present in my upbringing that I kind of got allergic to the absence of that in mainstream society. And so all of that, I think, just set me, as soon as we left the monastery, as soon as we left the community I grew up in, I was in search of spiritual community. So high school, college, that's what I was thirsting for. And so at the end of college, I really felt I've gotten a great education. I really enjoyed school, but I was very clear I didn't learn things I really needed to learn, like how to be happy, how to understand my suffering, how to not inadvertently cause myself and others suffering. And so I just knew I needed to find a spiritual teacher in a community, and I didn't know what that would look like. I wasn't thinking Buddhism or Christianity or anything. I was just thinking, some kind of resonance with the way I had been raised. And so as soon as I came to Plum Village, a friend of mine in college told me about Plum Village. As soon as I came there for the summer retreat, this was in 1997, I knew this is my teacher, this is my community. Like, I felt it was so clear, like, I'm home. And so that's what brought me to monastic life in the Buddhist tradition. And I will say one thing too. I went to Catholic school for 2 years when I was in Kenya. We got kicked out of our private school because we weren't paying. Our parents were raising money all over the continent, doing 500 village development projects around Kenya, and they couldn't make the payments for our school, so we got kicked out. And the Catholic sisters, the Loreto Convent Masangari, took us in. They were okay with our parents paying whenever they had the money. So I had this very strong experience with Mother Mary in the chapel. We would pray in the chapel every morning together. I wasn't raised Catholic, but I really could resonate with her. And then just very impressed by the nuns who were our teachers and directing the school. And so me and 2 other girls, when I was 11, remember one time at lunch, we just said to each other, I'm going to be a nun when I grow up. So that seed was also planted because of being around the nuns. Now, it was a very different kind of nun that I became, but I don't discount that childhood inspiration.
Thank you, Kaira. And, I mean, that resonance and searching for spiritual community again, which I think is, the great missing puzzle piece in so many people's lives right now. We'll circle back to that. I am curious if you had any more to say on, like, particularly you do touch these two traditions of Christian and Buddhist, and have, I think embraced quite the multitude in various ways. But with that particular Buddhist flavor you encountered at Plum Village, was there anything particularly resonant in the Buddhist teachings or how Thich Nhat Hanh navigated, which really particularly was resonant?
What I remember feeling when I first came to Plum Village was, I was a pretty devout Christian when I think about it as a young person. Like, I read the Bible. Like, I remember coming home from school and thinking, how do I handle these, kids that are bullying me in high school? And I literally pulled out the Bible and was like, okay, I have to forgive, or I have to love them, and finding some real solace in that. But we went to church, and we listened to sermons, my dad and I. And in college, I sought out a church. I didn't have a car, but I found my way to get to a church not far from our campus, and I would go very regularly. So it was something that I was, committed to. And I really didn't have any experience with Buddhism. I think I went to one, Buddhist students' meditation on campus, and I heard Ram Dass speak on campus. That was very impactful. I had been doing yoga at a yoga center, an ashram with Baba Hari Das in Santa Cruz, the Mount Madonna Center. I would go there for retreat sometimes, and I started a meditation practice that was informed by the yoga tradition. But when I came to Plum Village, what made so much sense to me was it was so practical. Like, all the things I had learned in Christianity that were very inspiring for me about loving everyone, about forgiving, about I just didn't have the kind of practices to do that throughout the day that I found in Buddhism. So the gathas, the mindfulness poems throughout the day, the practices of beginning anew for renewing relationships, the 5 mindfulness trainings. Boy, when I met the 5 precepts, I was like, it was like water in a parched desert. I thought, this is what, even though I had been practicing Christianity, I had been looking everywhere. I looked to my friends, I looked to my professors, like, how am I supposed to live? What are my ethical guidelines? And I just wasn't seeing that. And when I found the 5 mindfulness trainings, I was like, oh, finally, this is it, So that, and then just the way the community lived with, there was just such a clarity of what the purpose of everyone's actions were. Everyone was circling around the same, mindfulness, compassion, living as one body. And so I think that's really what spoke to me in Buddhism. And oh, by the way, before I got to Plum Village, I had been traveling in India for 3 months, and I had read Old Path, White Clouds, Thay's book about the life of the Buddha, and I just fell in love with the Buddha. That was my first book, really. I mean, I had read Thay's book on walking meditation, that tiny little book, and I had started practicing walking meditation around the lake on campus. But when I read that book about the Buddha's life, I thought, no, this is somebody I really want to get to know better. And I mean, it was just complete high octane inspiration. Like, give me more of this. And so learning about the Buddha, and then learning about Thay's life and the way, just the way he dealt with the suffering of the war and transformed so much of that suffering, and just was able to stay so loving and nonviolent and compassionate in the midst of so much violence and harm. Like just the Buddhist teachings embodied in his life, that was like such a transmission of like, this is possible. You can live this way. And here's how to do it in these very concrete ways. And I think that just the kind of all-encompassing aspect of the practice where, it literally was from morning till night. Like as soon as you wake up, you set your intention for the day with the waking up gatha. Waking up this morning, I smile. 24 brand new hours are before me. I vow to live them mindfully and look upon all beings with eyes of compassion and love. And then, the rest of the day was that, through the songs we would sing, through the walking meditation, through the sitting meditation, through eating mindfully. Like in every moment you were embraced in, here's how you stay present for your life. And there are people around you trying to do that moment by moment. And, Ty would, he gave us an assignment once. I remember in that first visit to Plum Village, I was there for 4 months. He was like, go to the bathroom and take a shower in mindfulness and write me a letter about what it's like to do that. And it was phenomenal, the things that came for me in like really paying attention in ways that I never used to pay attention. I mean, very kind of, to really see the act of taking in food and then passing on our waste as like a holy moment, and reflecting on, all the ways I had been interbeing with my world since I was a baby, the ways nourishment had come in and waste had gone out, and like, where is that now? And, like, what's me, what's not me? And how is it that all of that is, like this sense of the infinity of the way that we participate with the world around us, and, that it's holding us in so many more ways than we know. And then taking a shower and realizing how often I, was rushing and, kind of a little bit violent with myself because I wasn't paying attention. And then this invitation to just really allow myself to be kind to myself, to be aware of this, this important part of the day that I would often rush through. And so so I wrote a letter to Tay, just sharing the insights from the showering, from going to the bathroom, and he read it to the community, in the next Dharma talk. And so just to have that kind of like, wow, like if you just turn your attention to any aspect of your life that you haven't been paying attention to, you can have, you can really wake up in that moment. You can see and experience things you've never touched that are pretty miraculous. So, he was constantly asking us to get curious about the minutiae of our lives and to stay awake in those moments, and to notice the arising of anger or irritation or judgment or, blaming, and to see that, to really see, in this microscopic way, the stories that our mind was telling us, and to really, not be the victims of our mind's stories by, all the attention to the daily activities could then sharpen our minds so we could see our habit energies and our ways of talking and listening or not listening to people, and so that, so that we could learn to communicate differently and really, again, this was a very international community with people from very different backgrounds and life experiences. And so what does it take to, form community with people who have such different, maybe, worldviews, and how do you, take refuge in each other enough to make very big decisions, right? Like we were a community. We had to, decide who was going to be allowed into the community as novices, or, how we were going to deal with issues from the society around us of certain requirements that we had to meet, and certain standards, or so many different things we had to come together around to solve. You can only do that if you have trust in each other, and when you come from so many different walks of life, the common language was mindfulness. Like if each of us could practice, and if others could see, though, that person is practicing, that person is coming back to themselves and taking a breath so that they don't respond reactively. They are listening and trying to hear beyond someone's bitter words, hear deeper than that, to hear the need of that person. And they're responding with kindness, with compassion, even when that person is, being very, unkind in their words. So if we could observe this in each other, that's what allowed us to trust each other, to kind of have a sense of, I can build community with this person because we're practicing the same practice. We don't have to have the same cultural framework, cultural background. If we are orienting in the same way towards our own mind, that was our common language. Yeah.
So many threads there. You're touching on the 5 mindfulness trainings. This is Thai, or Thich Nhat Hanh, his reformulation of the 5 precepts, elaboration of the 5 precepts. Would love to go more into that. Also, you're bringing up his gatha practice, or these verses, I think, collected in present moment, wonderful moment. These very practical trainings throughout the day to say, when you're brushing your teeth, brushing my teeth and rinsing my mouth, I vow to speak words of kindness and compassion, and which are very applicable and very take-onable for anybody who wants to. His book, Living Buddha, Living Christ, I think, Living Buddha, Living Christ, a huge influence and bridge between my grandmother, a devout Christian myself, when I was becoming interested in Buddhism, and also a thread. You mentioned before we started recording that your husband is your partner is a Episcopal minister, Episcopal preacher, and we have our weekly gatherings at the Episcopal Church, and we'll once a year do a Taizé service where we bridge Living Jesus, Living Christ, and kind of chant, and they sing various verses from each tradition based on the blessings of the Holy Spirit and the Tin Parami. So, or the Tin Paramita, the perfections. But just to take one step back before going into any of those many threads, we'd be curious. I think there are some number of people, although Thich Nhat Hanh, certainly in my Dharma life, has formed a huge role, in introducing me to Buddhism. He and the Dalai Lama, their books on Buddhism were basically what you could find 20 or 30 years ago in bookstores. And there are some people who maybe don't know who Thich Nhat Hanh is, don't know him as Thai. And so who is Thich Nhat Hanh? And just a portrait in miniature.
Sure. So I would say, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh is someone who grew up in central Vietnam, in Hue, who became a monk at age 16, and was from the beginning a reformer. someone who really loved the Buddha, loved the teachings of awakening, and really wanted them to be as accessible as possible. And that was a thread throughout his whole life. So he wanted to update Buddhism to make it more relevant and absorbable by modern day people in his country. And so he wanted to learn all of the modern subjects. In those days, in Buddhist institutes, you only studied the sutras and Sino-Vietnamese. But he was like, we need to learn science, we need to learn history, we need to learn geography. All these things need to be part of our curriculum. So he actually started his own Buddhist institute soon after he was became a teacher or a bhikkhu, I can't remember, but he really was someone who updated Buddhism and gave young people and the public in Vietnam a way to see how Buddhism could be applied in society. So he came up with the term engaged Buddhism and started a journal and wrote so many books under pen names, because by then he was already, under fire from both the North and the South. He was seen as sort of an enemy because he didn't take sides. He wasn't pro-communist. He wasn't pro-US. And so he was all about uplifting, the poor and not just, updating Buddhism, but he trained thousands of young social workers to go out and bring, schools and, support to farmers and clinics to rural areas of Vietnam. And he's an incredible writer who's written hundreds of books. He's a scholar who's translated many texts. And he was exiled from Vietnam and was given asylum in France because he called for peace during the war. That was his crime. His photo was in the Museum for War Criminals all the way up until 2005, when we finally went back to Vietnam with him. He had been exiled for almost 40 years, and we saw his picture and Sister Chung Kong's picture, his main assistant for, the last 60 years of his life. Both of their pictures were in the Museum of War Criminals for calling for peace. So he was someone who was very clear and able to stay very committed to the cause of peace and justice, even though he was deeply misunderstood, and so much so that people, tried to kill him on a number of occasions. But he never had hatred. He never had bitterness for that. He understood no person can be my enemy. Only ignorance is our enemy. And so we never want to eliminate a person. We want to try to uproot ignorance, try to uproot the misunderstanding that's at the root of this. So he came to the West. He led the Buddhist peace delegation to the peace talks in Paris, and helped to support those escaping Vietnam after the war ended, to settle in countries throughout the West. He would go to refugee camps to support refugees and teach them, public. He was a publisher. He one of his first things he bought was this huge print machine so that he could print manuals for people in refugee camps, so they could learn the language of where they were going, so they could, also recite and chant the Buddhist sutras and get spiritual nourishment during a very difficult time. So he was a humanitarian, he was a peace worker, he was an activist, he was an incredible poet. He wrote many books of poetry. But then he settled in France and he started and founded the Plum Village lineage, which was, he was trained in Pure Land Buddhism, but he found Zen as a young monk and found the early Vietnamese roots of Zen. And so he combined that with his Pure Land training. And then he also discovered the early teachings of the Buddha, the Anapanasati, the Sutra on Mindfulness of Breathing, and then the Satipatthana, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness Sutra. And those became his core texts that he always came back to and taught throughout his whole life. That's what he would teach. In any week-long retreat, it would be, either day by day, the 16 exercises of breathing, or day by day, each of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So he was a unifier of Buddhist traditions, and he never wanted to say one tradition was better than the other or above the other, but that he, Theravada, Mahayana, all of the traditions, I think really lived deeply in him. And also, Christianity and other traditions, he was someone who deeply embraced truth and beauty, and he wanted to understand. Wherever he went, he tried to understand and appreciate the beauty of that place. So because he lived in the West, he really wanted to honor Christianity. So he had a picture on his altar of the Buddha and Jesus arm in arm, and he would prostrate to that every day. So he was, honoring Buddha and Jesus every single day. And so many people from many different traditions were his disciples. There were, Catholic monks and nuns who took the 5 mindfulness trainings from him. There were Muslims and Jews and Sikhs and atheists, and he was that kind of teacher who could inspire people from any faith. He wasn't dogmatic. That was his real signature teaching was, openness, non-attachment to views. Anyone could practice mindfulness, and he would say, whatever tradition you're from, go back and root in your own tradition, and let mindfulness help you to be a better Christian, a better Jew, a better Hindu. You don't have to become Buddhist. So he was very respectful of the various traditions and encouraged dialogue. And we would have interfaith monastic dialogue at Plum Village, where Catholic and other monastics would come, and we would have a retreat together. And one time we had a 3-week silent retreat with monastics and people of other faiths at Plum Village. So he was an innovator and someone who always wanted to take down the barriers that prevented people from accessing the really transformative aspects of the Buddha's teachings. So, and that continued until he passed away. So as a monk in the West, as a Zen master, he was always kind of on the forefront, offering a retreat for law enforcement people where there was no Buddha, no bowing, no incense offering. This was a secular retreat for police officers, law enforcement, judges, attorneys to learn mindfulness so that it could help them in their daily life to be more peaceful, more clear thinking. And he did retreats for business people, and that would become a book. I've had a chance to edit some of his teachings into books. So The Art of Power was his teachings to business people. That's a book I got to work on. But he would go into prisons and teach to people in prison. He would do retreats for healthcare workers or retreats for Vietnam veterans. He brought Israeli and Palestinian groups together to Plum Village to practice and do deep listening with each other. So he was always looking for how can we apply the teachings of the Buddha to this particular form of suffering? How does the form of this teaching needs to change so that this group of people can access it? I remember we led a retreat for Congress people in Washington, D.C. And there was someone who came on that retreat who said, I practice walking meditation every time I go to the House of Congress to vote, and it helps me cast a better vote. Mm-hmm. So he was that kind of person and teacher and innovator and visionary who could see just how human every one of us is, and how the Buddha's teachings could be adapted or applied in all these various ways. He did the first people of color retreats in our tradition, and so he would deeply reflect, what is this group of people? What is their needs? What are their sufferings? And the teachings would come out specific to them.
Thank you, Kaira.
Yeah,
it's quite something to hear someone who spent so much time with Thich speak to him, and it reminds me, you saying that what was the basis of that community was the shared sense of mindfulness and being a citizen of mindfulness, in a sense, being also what he was able to bring to all these different kind of parts of society. Mm. And from that center of mindfulness, kind of the still axle around which, wholesome qualities can turn, the wide edge of the rim, which we're speaking to, of community, and this huge lack, like the dryness you felt on finding, as a child, that you're no longer a part of that community, and just feeling the sterileness. I feel like this is deep in people's hearts, and even if some of us don't even know what we're missing because we didn't grow up with that nourishment. Mm-hmm. And certainly it seems like a thread through your whole life, where coming back to the monastery and now creating a community. So for those listening who don't have a community, Christian communities and other religious communities, by and large, have become a lot more kind of less cohesive than they might have been at some point as center points of a life. Mm-hmm. They probably don't have a monastery ready. They can't just give up their family life and step into a community. So what advice or thoughts would you offer to those listening for how they can find community too, and sort of practical pieces of wisdom for them in this day and age of isolation?
Yeah. I think there's so many ways to create community, and we need all the ways, right? Like, I think the pandemic really taught us how much can happen over Zoom, and there are so many beautiful communities on Zoom that right from our living rooms or our offices, we can tap into groups that meet regularly, that practice together, that allow for even deeper sharing, deeper connecting with one another. So there are just so many different groups that we can be a part of on Zoom that can fulfill some of that need for community. Of course, for some people that isn't how they can connect. But I think a lot of people have mentioned to me over the years since the pandemic how surprised they've been with the depth of connection that can come over Zoom. And that just does make things so much more accessible. If you have a busy life with children, with parents to care for, and you can't, drive across town or wherever to meet with a group in person, there are these options to connect online. Even whole retreats that you can do, a day long or half a day, so you can have a deeper immersion, or just a weekly group. And then there are the apps, that's a little bit less of a sense of community sometimes, depending on the app. But some of the apps really try to create, live events where you can leave comments and you can talk to the teacher. So there are more and more ways that the digital space is trying to respond to the need for community. Again, that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. It depends on each of us individually. But one of the things Thich would often say is, if there's no community where you are, start one. And he said, Sangha building is the most noble task. So for some people, your community could be your family. If you're fortunate enough to be able to share the teachings with, the people you live with, or friends or family, you could meditate with them on a regular basis, or listen to a Dharma talk, or read something together, or go on a walking meditation together, or have one meal in mindfulness every week where you eat silently for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and just savor the food. So there are many different ways you could bring this into your daily life with other people if they're open to it. But you could also become part of a more formal group that meets in person every week, or, that might organize retreats on a regular basis. You could connect with retreat centers where retreats happen. So there are many different ways that we can really make the practice a bigger part of our life with other people, whether it's online, in our homes, with a group in person, at a retreat center, or on a retreat. So I think it depends on each of our life circumstances, but certainly making time and space for our own personal practice and finding ways to stay connected to others. I mean, that's the 3 jewels, right? Sangha is one of the 3 jewels. And so if we're going to take refuge, we need to have Sangha in our life somehow.
Kaira, as a basis for that community, we've already mentioned having a sense of ethics or a shared sense of morality or virtue. And I really do. I've first read it probably 25 years ago or so, but the mindfulness trainings, the 5 mindfulness trainings, and this won't be familiar to a lot of the people watching who maybe do have more of a theravada leaning and are used to the 5 precepts just being phrased very matter-of-factly as specific actions one doesn't do. I undertake the precept to refrain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxicant use. And what Thich does is he broadens that, not to just refraining, but active aspiring, reframing the first precept of refraining from killing to reverence for life, to stealing to true happiness, contentment, sexual misconduct, refraining from that, to true love. Refraining from lying is loving speech and deep listening, and then refraining from intoxicants is true nourishment. And if I could, I would just read the first 2 lines of the reframing of that first precept, just to give people a flavor of this. And this is only the first 2 lines of a whole paragraph, but aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion, and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking or in my way of life. So very beautiful aspirations. And I'm curious, I have heard some Theravada teachers speak about the simplicity of, or the shortness of the Pali framing. I undertake the precept to refrain from killing, it just being a very clear black and white. So, if I break that, then it's very clear where you've stepped over the line. Whereas when things are elaborated in such length and really going to the ideal of compassion for all beings, it's not as clear. It might seem for someone who hasn't lived in that tradition, how one relates to such a grand goal for all 5 of those. So just curious if you could elaborate, how did people memorize like the full paragraph, and how are those lived? The beauty, if there are drawbacks or to that elaboration, or just how is that lived? Very curious, because I've never lived in a community that took them on so fully.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think just to give some context, the reason Tay rewrote those precepts was because, and changed them from precepts to mindfulness trainings, was because there was so much wounding around the Christian and the commandments of don't do this and thou shalt not, and the judge, the sense of, sort of being cast out if you did what you were told not to do, and so the changing it to a mindfulness training, so already it's like, okay, this is something I'm practicing. I don't have to get it 100% right every time. I'm on my way. I'm on a journey with this, and then starting each training with the words "aware of the suffering caused by blank I am committed to" was very deliberate to say, we do this because we see if we don't do this, we cause suffering to ourselves and to others. So it was a reframing of, this doesn't come from on high, some external authority. This is from your own inner authority, that you see this, and that's why you wish to live this way. So it really locates the agency in us. So it's much harder to get allergic to that, to feel, this resistance to that. And so with your question about do we memorize them, I never sat down to memorize them, but we recited them every 2 weeks. And so you almost memorize it because you hear it and you read it and you're in that water so much that those are just, and part of the text when you transmit, as a Dharma teacher, we transmit these mindfulness trainings to others. And we say you need to recite them at least once a month. But if you don't recite them once in 3 months, today's ceremony is nullified. So basically, if you get too far from them, the transmission doesn't hold you anymore, because if you're not reading them regularly, you're not living them. You're not in swimming in those waters. So we encourage people to read them at least once a month, and to recite them with a community, to actually have a group of people that you read them out loud with and you reflect on them with. So that's something, a precepts recitation ceremony or a mindfulness trainings recitation ceremony is something that the sanghas that meet in our tradition regularly will hold on a regular basis. So, but one of the ways in which we talk about them, which I think is helpful, is as a North Star. We're never going to get to the North Star, right? But the North Star will always tell us how to go north. And so the mindfulness trainings are so vast and so all-encompassing that it can be intimidating to know, how do we do this? How do we not only protect life ourselves, but prevent others from taking life? That's a really big... That's a high bar, right? But so the idea isn't that we would just, do them all perfectly, but that we see them as signposts on the highway. Keep going this way. This is how you keep staying on this path. And so, Tay would say, you don't need to be 100% non-killing, but keep going in the direction more and more each day of not killing. So keep looking for ways to protect life yourself and to support others to protect life, and look deeply with your community to see how to do that, how to, and then there's so many dilemmas that are unavoidable in life. I mean, I remember as nuns, we had a poplar poplar grove that was infested with a kind of beetle that was going to kill all the poplar trees. And so we meditated on it for we had some very intense discussions on how do we apply this first mindfulness training to save the trees, which would mean killing the beetles, or not kill the beetles, which would mean allowing the trees to die. And there were strong feelings on both sides. And we decided finally, we decided we needed to save the trees. And so we had the beetles killed. And so, it's never a perfect, you can't do them perfectly. Every time you boil water, you kill microbes in the water. But it's like, how do we make decisions that help us go more and more each day towards being more reverent for life? So if we had to kill the beetles, we could do a ceremony where we let them know ahead of time that what time and date the fumigators or whatever, whatever the treatment was, what time they were going to come. And we made an offering to them and we said, please, have a good life in another place. We are so sorry we're going to do this, but this is the best we can do to save these trees. So even in the act of killing, we try to nourish our compassion and nourish our love for these beings. So,
thank you, Kaira. Yeah, I really appreciate that simile of the way these are framed as being a North Star. That's really beautiful. And I think a lot of people who do take on any kind of precept or virtuous training, if things get too legalistic, it doesn't go well, or people aren't examining things. And I also appreciate, like in the theravada, this kind of like fences, both having a North Star and having fences that kind of protect us and protect others. And I think Thich Nhat Hanh's, his framing kind of does a pretty good, inspiring job of trying to hold both of those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is, I've just been sorting through the various questions I want to ask, and there's not nearly enough time, honestly. What I will want to ask for your favorite gathas, Kaira, but that can wait for the end, because there's one I really think is important to ask. And you've worked a lot with, as a person of color, worked with people of color. And, Buddhism in North America has notoriously been in a largely white group. And, I think I'm curious first why you think it's been so hard or alienating for people of color to enter those spaces. And if you see any change now, and what kind of awarenesses or shifts that white contingent or non-people of color contingent of the Buddhist community can make to kind of make it an easier integration, or one that is more, allowing. I don't even know the complete words around it, but it feels important to ask because it's very much, I've wondered this, and I wondered if you would speak to that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first to just acknowledge that, really the first Buddhist groups in the U.S. were the heritage Buddhists, the Asian Buddhists, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and still ongoing, very strong, not white.
I feel embarrassed already for having asked that question that way. So.
That's fine. But just to remind us all that, the Asian Buddhists are the original Buddhists of this land. But when Buddhism started to spread among, those of the sort of dominant culture of the white culture in the U.S. and North America, I think we shouldn't expect anything else, because our society was and continues to be quite segregated. I mean, racism is really a facet. It's in the DNA of our country, of our society, and so it's very hard if you've been raised in a mostly white context, gone to school in a mostly white context, and your social world is mostly white. You're not suddenly going to have a sangha that's that's representative of the whole society if that's not what your life looks like. So we recreate the things that we are familiar with. So that's, very natural. It's unfortunate, but it's what happens. Just like, Dr. King would say, Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week, right? Everyone goes to their respective spiritual communities. And so same in Buddhism. And, one of the things that Thomas Merton used to say in the 60s and when in his writing was, he was speaking to white people and he was saying, what you want to know what Black people want? And I'm not trying to say Black people stand in for all people of color, but in this example, he would say, you want to know what Black people want? They want white people to learn to think Black. And so I think when we think about how our sanghas can be more inclusive, it's about people with privilege, and this goes for any aspect of privilege, right? Whether we're straight, whether we're cisgender, whether we're economically privileged. How do we really understand what it's like to not have that privilege? Because that's what's going to help us break the barriers to those people of whatever backgrounds feeling at ease in our groups. So, so I think, doing work around understanding that privilege. So really, I think that's, to me, really part of the spiritual path is whatever area we have privilege in, studying that in a skillful, not to shame or blame ourselves, because we're part of a stream. We got conditioned by all the things before we were even conceived. We were already being conditioned. So it's not our fault, but we're still responsible to take, care of the impacts of that. So how do we really learn, so to really study, okay, disability justice, how do I understand all the ways I take for granted being, physically able so that I don't, create hardship for those who aren't. How do I understand, the other ways I have privilege? Being from the United States, having English as my mother tongue. How do I not assume that that's, the experience of other people who want to have access to these teachings, right? So it's all of our work, not just white people, but all of our work to examine the places where we have privilege with compassion, with wisdom, with the insight of non-self and interbeing, so that we can, it's like Tay was trying all the time to understand people different from him. He wasn't going into environments and saying, you have to see this the way I see it. He was saying, no, how can I see it the way you see it? So that, we can have these skillful means and present things in a way that are easier for people to receive. But I think also, it's like we can't do everything well. And I think, we don't want to try to, have perfect be the enemy of the good. Like, I think we can focus on one or two areas and do those well and not try to become, not expect ourselves to undo everything we've been conditioned, like that. It takes time, and and we need a community, and we need to be compassionate with ourselves. And if we can, look at even one or two areas of our privilege, that's already really, really important.
Thank you, Kaira. And I love introducing, that's humbling and very important for us. And I do also love introducing the idea of like view privilege. Like I feel very privileged that we have the Buddhist teachings, that we've got the right view, that I'm the owner of my karma, heir to my karma. And yes, have the Buddhist teachings. And it is interesting as a monastic, and I don't know if you felt this, and we might have to have another interview, we're probably wrapping up, but just as a monastic, we are in a minority. I mean, for whitish guys like us, men like us, it's our main minority status is in America being monastics. And it is an interesting window onto different aspects of things and how people look at us or don't look at us. And but longer discussion, I think.
That's, just to say something my partner often says is what the Franciscans say. You all have taken the path of downward mobility, which is not the path that most, white men in our society take. And so that's a kind of beauty that gives you a perspective of non-privilege.
I love that frame, but also us having a YouTube channel that kind of spirals the trajectory upwards. But would love if you could share, you shared the first verse upon waking, the Gatha. Curious if you could share any more of these verses which people can memorize. My sister and her daughter have memorized the one on brushing their teeth, but ones which you think people can take up and use throughout the day to just recenter, requiet.
Yeah, thank you. What a beautiful question. Well, one that comes to mind is looking in the mirror. Awareness is a mirror reflecting the 4 elements. Beauty is a heart that generates love and a mind that is open.
Oh, so good. So good.
So when we were studying to be novices, we had to memorize about 50 of these. That was part of our monastic training. And so I put some of them to music to help me remember them. This one is for sweeping. Shall I sing it? Because then I make sure I remember it. Okay. As I carefully sweep the ground of enlightenment, a tree of understanding springs up from the earth. And that one's a little shorter, but it's based on a story of a Zen teacher who was awakened by sweeping a pebble and the sound of the pebble hitting something, and then he was awakened. But there's another one at the end of the day is now ended, our lives are shorter. Let us look carefully, what have we done? Noble community, with all of our hearts, let us be diligent, engaging in practice, so that life does not drift away without meaning.
Wow. Yeah. I think we're going to end on a better note than that. Kaira, we'll post a link to some of these in the chat or in the description for people. Great. But just to say, this has been too short, and yet the depth of the kind of life that you've lived and those daily framings and kind of the sanctity, it just really spoken through your presence, and just being with you even via Zoom or whatever platform we're using. It's been a really beautiful morning. It was to make this connection.
Oh, for me too. I'm so grateful for both of you and what you're doing, and also for just the support you are manifesting for the bhikshunis. Thank you.
we'll look forward to having both the communities on either side of the coast hopefully flourish, and this being a long connection between our sides of the coast. So
wonderful. Please keep me informed. I would love to be on your mailing list and be of support however I can be to what you all are building.
Thank you.